Skyping in from our nation's capital, Ashley McGuire of the Catholic Association. Ashley, we thank you so much for your time, and we welcome you here to America's Forum. I guess the first question is this: can you give us your take on the ruling now that the dust has settled the morning following the announcement of the decision?
Well, I agree with you that this was a landmark ruling. It's probably one of the biggest religious liberty rulings in a long time, definitely since the Hosanna Tabor case. Basically, what the court said is that you don't have to forfeit your religion to start a family business. That should be obvious to all of us, but I think in today's age, it's apparently not, and it's definitely not apparent to our president. So what a relief that the court rebuked our president and the really extreme hard line he was towing on this. I mean, he was shot down 9-0 in the last big religious liberty case to hit the court. So we know he's an extremist when it comes to this issue, but thankfully the court came down on the right side and the Religious Freedom Restoration Act remains intact.
Now, Ashley, Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid turned to Twitter to offer up his own response to the ruling, tweeting, "It's time that 5 men on the Supreme Court stop deciding what happens to women." He also tweeted, "If the Supreme Court will not protect women's access to health care, then Democrats will." So what's your response to Mr. Reid's comments?
You know, the idea that Democrats are still trying to make this about women is so absurd. I mean, what I want to say is you guys lost, move on, find a new talking point. But it really is worth addressing this issue about women because, first of all, the plaintiffs, Hobby Lobby and Conestoga Wood, are co-owned by women. Then you look at the nonprofit cases, which are yet to be decided. And the first case to hit the court is a group of women, the Little Sisters of the Poor, and EWTN, a Catholic news network started by a woman. So the idea that this is about men versus women is absurd. And then this really paternalistic line the left has about bosses versus women's rights implies that women are bosses, which, as we know from the plaintiffs, is not true. But the polling shows that women do not like the HHS mandate. And just the idea that women don't support them. I mean, if you were at the court yesterday, the press conference afterwards was almost all women. I think it was maybe all women. I mean, the Becket Fund lawyers most of them are women. The group is headed by women. So I just flat out reject the idea that this is in any way about men versus women.
And while the Democrats continue to try to play, I guess, a battle of the sexes card, even though you outlined some of the absurdity of their rhetoric, in terms of representing a group that supports religious freedoms, what areas of Obamacare do you see most likely as being challenged next via the courts?
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, we know for a fact that the nonprofit, I mean, this is not over. I think we should celebrate this victory, but we still have to address the non-for-profit cases. And there's a little bit of concern if you're reading the opinion, and I'm still working my way through it, that there's a sense that the quote-unquote accommodation that the government has offered groups like the Little Sisters of the Poor is sufficient. And they are arguing absolutely not. This still requires them to facilitate access to these goods. So we're going to have to watch and see what happens with that. There's still going to be a challenge there. And I don't think we can expect the president to back off, even though you'd think he would after this loss. So there's definitely that. But I do think that this did kind of put a stopgap in the way of any sort of, I mean, if we had lost this case, I think the concern would have been, can the government then compel healthcare workers to participate in abortions? So I think we should be also relieved that that's probably not going to happen. Beyond that, I don't really know. I think there's other sort of different parallel challenges going on to the healthcare law, but I think this was good momentum to those challenges because it shows that the law does have weak points and the court is willing to address those.
Now, actually, the group Planned Parenthood has started a campaign on Facebook called Join the Dissent. What's your reaction to their campaign?
I don't know. Planned Parenthood, they're so ridiculous. They had so many people there yesterday, and I had to think these people must be paid to be here because they didn't even seem to understand the stakes in the issue. And the funny thing is that, Planned Parenthood and NARAL and groups like that are both at the same time trying to say that, for example, with the Hobby Lobby case, that the only forms of birth control that Hobby Lobby objects to were the ones that the FDA's own label says can destroy an embryo, which is an abortion in their eyes. And so groups like Planned Parenthood are saying, "Oh, these aren't abortifacient." Well, if they aren't, then why are you there?
Now, what would you say to people that say this kind of opens the door for other things? Now, can they say you can't have vaccines or blood
No, in fact-
transfusions? That's one of the arguments.
Now, the court addressed this right off the bat in its summary of the case. They make it very clear this does not in any way give a free pass to that. And I think that's a totally separate issue because that really gets to the compelling government interest question, which the court doesn't really address here because they say even if it is a compelling government, they sort of sidestep that. And even Anthony Kennedy said, even if this were free birth control for all women, even if this really was a compelling government interest, the court hasn't shown that it's done so in the least restrictive means possible on employers. So, that's a separate issue. But, I really think that's going down a rabbit hole. They want people to go down that rabbit hole. But even the court said, don't go down that rabbit hole. This is only about the HHS mandate and this particular issue.
Ashley, we will try to avoid rabbit holes, but I thought you said something interesting about reading the opinion and going through just all the verbiage and the rationale. Now, I want to move away from that opinion and give you a chance to amplify a little more on your discussion of a group such as Little Sisters of the Poor and what those groups have to do. I believe you called it Affirmation. Is this where a group collectively would have to sign some sort of document that would, I guess the net result, I hate to use this old expression, allow the government to have its cake and eat it too, to provide other ways to offer abortifacients for contraception, but without the group being involved per se? What is the distinction the administration is trying to offer, Ashley, and is it a distinction with a real difference?
Well, first of all, we know for a fact that if the government really thought this was such a compelling government interest, they could just offer these products for free for all women. They don't want to do that for some reason. For some reason, they're really insistent on making people like the Green family and people like the Little Sisters of the Poor somehow involved, which sort of asks questions about what their motives are. But essentially, the quote-unquote accommodation that the government has offered a group like the Little Sisters of the Poor is that they don't have to pay for the services, which is different than what the Hans and the Greens are dealing with. They don't have to pay for it. They don't even have to really include it in their health care plan, but they do have to sign a form saying for their employees that you will get it from a third-party administrator. Now, this raises all sorts of other issues because what if you don't have a third-party administrator? You're something like Notre Dame University, where you don't go through some other sort of agency, and that still puts groups like the Little Sisters of the Poor in the same position where they're basically they're facilitating the flow of these goods to their employees. It would be like, asking a Mormon or a Muslim mosque to basically, the government saying, look, you don't have to actually pour the drinks. We're just going to set up this little stand right here at the corner. Anybody who comes in can have a gin and tonic if they want. I mean, that's crazy. Or take a kosher butcher. It would be like saying, you don't have to pay for the pork. You don't even have to put it in the sandwich yourself. But some bureaucrat is going to come in and stand here on the side of the cash register and offer anybody pork who wants it. I mean, when you put it that way, it's very easy to see the unconscionable position that puts these groups in, but that's the exact same situation that we're dealing with. So that's where they stand.
Ashley, we appreciate your input on this and interesting metaphors or analogies you offer, helping us understand what is still at stake for Little Sisters of the Poor and other spiritual organizations. Ashley McGuire from the Catholic Association, thank you so much for your time and again for Skyping in to give us your take on yesterday's opinion. We very much appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And now it's your turn to offer your opinion on the opinion. We'd love you to get a hold of us, and you can do so via Twitter. You can tweet us your comments at Newsmax TV, # America's Forum. There's also email, no electronic stamp needed, just our address, connect@newsmaxtv.com, and there is Facebook as well. Straight ahead, a news update and former Congressman Pete Hoekstra.